Good morning, everybody. And I can add up to 3 guests to my broadcast. That's wonderful. 3 guests. So we're doing it through the phone this morning. And we want to see if we can't get Dr. Cameron Thompson on here. If we can get it to work. It's always about button pushing these days. I was noticing this the other day. Too many buttons. I think our modern world just depends on button pushing. There was a time when some people were button pushers and others were not button pushers. And now everybody's a button pusher, pushing buttons all day. Isn't that amazing? Yes, well, I tell you, bandits suspended. Wow, look at all these buttons. It's amazing. I can write a comment, I can push a button. I can push more buttons. In case you're wondering, it's still cold. Still cold, still cold. And, yeah, Minnesota. Here's a look-see. There it is, gray, cold. Sure, it's throughout the Midwest, probably in Italy too. We'll find out in a minute. Let's see if we can't figure out another way. I wonder if I could dual manage it. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Could I dual manage? Okay, streaming software to go live. Not much to say. I'm piling up the books really fast, I gotta say that. Oh, who is this behind me here? Oh, that's an Egyptian king. Egyptian king. I don't know who he is necessarily. Thutmose, perhaps. Certainly not Akhenaten, that's for sure. Akhenaten did not depict himself this way. I think perhaps this is a replica of the Kings of Karnak, maybe? I'm not really sure. But whatever the case, what's fascinating to me is you look at that, you can draw a right triangle down, a right angle here, and then draw a triangle right down from pretty much from the crown down to the scepter, down to the feet, and it makes a 3, 4, 5 triangle that they have put the figure into. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? And why, for instance, would they insist on the little square down here for the throne? See, it's a square, and this is a golden rectangle here. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? Yeah. You know that all the Egyptian kings had beards, too? See the beard? This one's broken off, I think, because it's like $5.99 at Home Depot or whatever it was. Wherever I got this, Pure One. But they all had beards. The pharaohs all had beards. They didn't grow beards, but even the women pharaohs, even the queens, wore the beard. It was a ceremonial beard down from the chin. And not quite sure what to make of that either, except for that everything in Egyptian culture seems to have been somehow related to mathematics. And the mathematics that we're talking about there is some pretty complex stuff. Guest request. Allow your viewers to request to join you as a guest in your broadcast. Well, why not? Come on. Come on. It's right there. That button's right there. You want to put that button on there? Put that button on there. Come on. Yeah, right. Allow your viewers to request to join you as a guest in your broadcast. And I pushed the button. It doesn't do anything because, technology. Again, that idea of all of us being button pushers used to be only some people pushed buttons all the time, daily, hour after hour. And they were kind of like, what an awful job that would have been to have nothing but button pushing all day long. Other people worked with their hands. They were artisans and they were musicians and they were speakers and they were writers and drivers of trucks and haulers of material. They didn't push buttons all day. But now, with the invention of the iPhone, Everybody can be a button pusher. Ha 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 ha. And it takes you bloody forever to figure out which button to push too, doesn't it? So you sit there for hours staring into the Palantir, trying to figure out which button it is you're supposed to push so you can make the thing work to go with the thingamabob that does the job. And bibbity bobbity boo. Ay, ay, ay. Here I go on a rant again. My kids told me the other day, Dad, you gotta stop ranting. I don't rant, but apparently I do. I think when I hit the Rubicon of 50, I started to rant. I gotta be one of those old codgers that goes around with a cane and be like, rah, 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 you kids, get off my lawn. That's gonna be me. I dream big. I aspire to greatness. One of these days. Oh, I can put on a mystery mask. That's cool. I can't get Dr. Thompson into the chat, but I can certainly put on a mystery mask. Let's surprise my viewers with a different mask every 5 seconds and see how long it takes you to actually lose your ever-loving mind. So right now I'm wearing a mask. It's the mask of my face. You didn't think it was a mask, but you wrong. I'm wearing a face that I keep in a jar by the door. Who is it for? Well, it's for all the lonely people. Where do they all come from? Hey, words. You know what a persona is? Besides an Ingmar Bergman movie. A persona, right? Or when you say you're a person. That's the essential you, I guess. The core of you. Your personage. And a persona, that's something you adopt. You know, like Robin Williams adopting a different persona every 5 seconds. That's a persona. And where does that word come from? Well, I'll tell you. It comes from the Greek person. Persona. Sonas means sound. And I'm going to try this the old-fashioned way and go to my other account because this is obviously not working. But it comes from the word sound. The Greeks on stage, they used to wear large masks because, you're up in the nosebleeds. You can't see diddly squat. So they wear large masks so people up in the high bleachers could see what was going on down on stage. And the mask would have an open slot where the mouth was. It was a face, an old man face or a young girl face, whatever it was. And then it would have a slot where the mouth was. And between the mask and the actor, there was a space, about that much. And there'd be a tube that they would speak through, and it would amplify the voice. And so their sound would come through that tube. It was the persona, was that tube. And their voice coming out from that mask was the persona. So being in a persona situation, I can add you at last. Being in a persona situation means it's not really you. It's actually something that you have created. A face to meet the faces that you meet, as T.S. Eliot says. So that's a persona. So the next time you're talking about adopting a persona, think for a minute where it comes from, because maybe it's not from a very good spot after all. Maybe persona is not what you want to adopt, but a real you. I don't know, just a thought. Coffee, liquor of the gods. So I invited you, Dr. Thompson. Now you have to find the right button so you can be a button pusher like everybody else and push those buttons. In case you missed my earlier rant. Oh, it turned red again. Okay, let's see what happens. Yeah, your view is going to approve this. Yeah, yeah. I'm approve it. Yeah, you approve it. I pushed the right buttons. I pushed the buttons. Hi, did I push the right buttons?
Yeah. Well, I had to go onto my phone here. And,
Un momento, por favore.
Access for the mobile.
Persona est diminuendo poco. Why can't I hear you?
Ameliorato.
As I say in America, why can't I hear you?
Can you hear me now?
What the hell? Hang on a second. Okay. See my hand? Look at my
I
hand.
see that hand. That is a fine hand. I'm reading your future right now.
Yeah, well, there's not much there, is it?
Blurry.
It's blurry. I get mystical creatures. Mystical creatures. Yeah. Well, good morning or afternoon there. Hey, is it still cold in Italy?
No, finally it's springish.
Good.
And that it's 20-something Celsius.
Oh, good.
So, high 60s, low 70s for the highs, It's
I-
finally spring.
I have friends, you remember them, the Johnsons, perhaps, Mark Johnson and Catherine Kirsten, maybe?
Yeah.
They're headed to Greece this week, so I wish them well. And
Oh,
the weather was good for them because goodness knows, the state is still gray, still cold. So,
yeah, body needs sunshine.
yeah, no kidding.
Soul, heart and soul needs sunshine. I'm going to try and find a place to set this thing.
That's fine. We'll begin once you're, set in stone.
Am I sideways if I go like this?
Yes, you're sideways, yeah.
Bother.
So you have to hold it?
The whole world got turned upside down. Yeah, that's exactly right.
You can get a really cool tripod from Amazon for like $6.
Yeah, I was going to say, once upon a time in a former world, I had in a galaxy far, far away, I had one of those. Deemed it not a vital solution. I think I have a solution here.
One of those.
Set this down from them. It was a non-vital thing in the Great Escape.
Yeah. Yeah, I sympathize. I still find myself now. I'm like, who's that character? I've lost my marbles. I've lost my marbles. Around looking for something. Like, where?
Toodles.
I had that when I was 18.
Yeah, when I was 18, I had one of those.
It's got to be here somewhere. Hard to accept that. You haul out things from your childhood and you remember them very fondly. Different from now when you were a kid. I think I hauled out the Star Wars figure collection the other day, and all the plastic is now degenerated.
Oh, geez.
It's degenerated. Yeah. So they're very brittle, and the arms are all falling off because the rubber bands inside are broken and all this. You're like,
oh, geez.
That's not what I remember. Oh. I'm sure they press new plastic by now, so I can go out and buy the whole set again.
Right.
If I want to.
Of course, that doesn't quite work either, does it? There's no solution. Damn you, Zucks.
Aqua scum.
Aqua scum. There is no escape. There's no sanctuary.
There's no sanctuary. It's sad but true. So do you have a Jimmy rig solution?
No, not here. Well, maybe here.
Like set it up against a teacup or something like that. I don't know.
Well, I've got to have it plugged in though. That's the thing. It's the damn cord that.
Oh yes, mine is really close to electrocuting me when I plug it in. The plastic is chewed off.
Oh yeah. I got to that point with one of them, and it finally did, and so I had to change it out eventually. Goodness gracious, world.
So here's something in the heart of narcissism. I've got you on my camera. I'm addressing you on my camera through this live chat, but then I'm looking at you and I on my computer, and this is true narcissistic behavior going on.
Oh yeah.
Are you? I'm not a narcissist.
Not a narcissist.
I tell myself that all the time.
It's enough about me.
Enough.
What do you think about me? Yeah, there was just a study that came out, I guess. I just, the headlines and the plebeian reinterpretation of things is always not worth reading, but the basic idea that they found that, in fact, shocking new discovery, that virtual team meetings, done through Zoom and all that, aren't as effective as in person. People are less, they accomplish less because they're not, because they're too focused on looking at their own mirror image on the screen and how they look on the screen and doing small grooming behaviors to actually communicate with one another.
What?
Yeah, I don't know where they're getting that from.
Who did the study? Yeah, like that's one of those moron moments. You're like, really? That's amazing. I never would have thought.
Yeah, and these are the people that are deciding your future, kids.
Yeah. That's a shocking thought right there.
Don't you worry. They've got it all under control.
Science.
Hmm?
I trust the science.
Trust the science, man.
I trust it.
Trust the science, man.
I do. Like I trust the hurdy-gurdy man. Same thing. Wow. Yeah. No, I wouldn't be surprised. So anyway, are you in a position now we can officially start the show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for now.
I will admit before we do, I haven't done a lick of legwork on this. I mean, this week is kind of something else for me. So.
Yeah, you and me both, which is okay because I think that fits the theme of the chapter.
What, wandering dark?
Wander out of the dark wood, eat through all our supplies because we're too damn tired of carrying the packs. Whatever you do, don't leave the path. I don't know. Let's wander over there and see if it's gonna go good. Just don't fall into the water either.
Seems to work.
Like a good mogwai, all of a sudden there you are, falling backwards into the river, and there goes the bomber.
When you read that passage, you know, Gandalf said, "Don't stray from the path and don't drink from the water." You ever read that passage and think, "Okay, wait, too many instructions, Gandalf." You know, you stay here, guard the prince, don't let anyone enter.
Wait. Sorry. So don't let anyone into the room until you're right. It's just
or anyone else says so. No. Okay, wait. I think I'm losing my mind. Okay, so I'm gonna poker face. We're gonna officially start the video here, so I have a starting point.
Okay. Oh, good. I'll just be sideways.
Yeah, don't be sideways. It's a screwy world to be in.
It's a screwy world. It's a mad world.
Good morning, Dr. Thompson.
Good morning, Mr. Lassiter. How are you on this fine morning afternoon?
I think on this morning afternoon I don't know, punchy, maybe a little punchy. Yeah, it's day after day of, you know, we saw the sun here 2 days ago for a day, and before that it was 7 days of gray, and now we have 2 days of gray, and the temperature is still somewhere in the 40s. And it just goes on and on. I remember this from last year, that similar thing. We had gray and nothing really growing yet, and cold. Oh my gosh! So, you know, the summer comes. It's lovely here. It's a lovely state to be in, as far as that goes. But it gets to you after a while.
But you have to earn it.
Yeah, that's what it is.
First, I guess. Good Protestant mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose so. I remember seeing a movie. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was about these women that were trying to leave the prairie. They'd come out as prairie wives, and things had gone. So they were all trying to leave the prairie and go back to their families east.
Right.
And, very dismal story.
The same thing to do.
Yeah, right. And the man that helps them out eventually takes them all back east safely, except for the main girl. But the point being is that it really depicted this sort of Midwestern madness, this gray, bleak madness that comes on people in the Midwest, I think, especially melancholic nature. I think it's really harsh. I can see where Scots and Irish types, mostly Scots, could come over and be like, oh yeah, Cumberland Gap, that's beautiful. Yeah, Nashville, Kentucky, Tennessee, that's beautiful. Ohio's pretty good. What the hell is this open plains, you know? just this miles of kind of nothing and gray weather and just bleak. So
you can deal with the the clouds and the mist and the rain and the cold, if you've got green hillsides around you, if you've got variation in the terrain, something's happening, even if if it's only physically, what's the word? You know, I mean, in the scenery, it's there. There's movement, visual. Even if it's only visual, there's something happening. But if it's just straight lines, gray above and straight gray below,
Yeah.
as far as a body could move in 3 days in any direction, kill you.
My daughter and I were talking about this the other day because you look at this gray sky and it's just as a flat mat of gray. It's not even a variation in the clouds. And you think, do something, please. Rain, snow, hurricane. I don't care. Something, but no, it just sits there. So, but I think it does get to you after a while. You have to make a decision. Are you going to allow it to continue to get to you, or are you going to do something to take a stand against a sea of arrows, so to speak? Which is a little. But I suppose that's what a nice segue into our chapter, because again, it's like you said earlier, wandering around in the dark and eating all the provisions. Yeah. So, anyway, enough about me. What do you think of me? We are doing today the chapter Flies and Spiders, I believe, which is chapter 8, if I'm not mistaken. Chapter VIII, Flies and Spiders. And the basic synopsis here, we left off last time. Gandalf says, you're going into the forest. You have to go through. You can't go north. You can't go south. And I'm not coming with you. So don't stray from the path. Don't drink from the stream. Don't talk to strangers. Blah, 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 blah. And hopefully, with a little luck, you'll get through. Bye. And the last chapter ends with they plunged into the forest. Uh-oh, I lost my audience. Oh, well, I'm just talking to myself. So they plunged into the forest, and that was that. No, that was sort of like the end of the last chapter. Very real cliffhanger of a chapter. And we pick up now with them in the forest, walking through the forest and experiencing what that's like. And to make a long story short, sorry to have lost you there for a sec.
Hey, it's the damn thing with the phone is that anytime a notification comes on, it somehow resets the reception of the stream from the beginning, and so then I get this continual recycle, very, very strange mise en beam sort of thing of sound, and it just goes till it crashes.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm just giving a synopsis right now of the story. So,
all right.
Make a long story short, they get through after various adventures. They get through to almost to the edge of the other side of the forest, but then they get caught by these spiders, and that's where Bilbo has to prove himself. And he fights the spiders using his sword, Sting, and his ring, and he saves the dwarves from almost certain death. Right? That's a basic synopsis of the plot. And there are a number of different gems in this chapter, I think, that are worth looking at, because it's a very claustrophobic, very dark chapter, I think. Like we were talking about earlier about the darkness of the Midwest, living under this canopy of gray for day after day and not knowing whether you're going to get out or not. But this is almost like being underground. The description of Mirkwood is like being underground or in a cave. It's almost like they got out of the goblin caves and go right back in again. The two major passages of the work are this underground in the goblin caves, and then underground here in Mirkwood, and then they're out on the other side, almost like a resurrection or birthing image. So I wanted to start off by just talking about Mirkwood itself. Why does Mirkwood exist? What is it? What has made it so dismal? What do we see in this imagery that next to anything historical human culture that we can tell? Okay, so that's where I want to start. What I know of Mirkwood is that it was not always Mirkwood. It was called at one point Greenwood the Great. So in an earlier age, it was a green, lush forest. But now it's taken on the name Mirkwood and taken on the qualities of mirk, which is another word for darkness, an Anglo-Saxon word from what I gather.
Mhm.
And it's taken on those qualities primarily because of what's happened in the South with the necromancer. Necromancer down in the South has taken up his castle, his domain, his fortress, and his infection, kind of like the dragon infection, has infected all the area round about, including this woods that has reacted to him by becoming much more dark, much more hostile to life, and much more like a imprisonment or tomb. So there's that quality. We also know that Greenwood the Great, which is still inhabited by elves up in the north, has a parallel in Fangorn Forest in the south. We find out later in the Lord of the Rings. And that they were, both of them, part of one continuous forest that has since been defoliated by humans and, of course, by the forces of Mordor. So really, we're looking at something tremendously ancient and something which has seen a great deal of humans and orcs and other creatures come and go, but has been infected most recently by this darkness of the necromancer. What else do we see in that imagery of the forest? I mean, we know Tolkien loved trees, right? And he used to love his walks among the trees. He was very put out when they tried to take down trees to put up shopping malls and things like that. So he's not a hostile to trees or an anti-tree person, but he does have images like here and elsewhere, like in the old forest, of trees being hostile to humans.
Right. Exactly right. He's got these. The trees aren't safe things, right? They're perilous. Forests are perilous. They're the domain of elves and wild things. It's very much in the wild, right?
Mm.
And later we see that being the case with Fangorn Forest. Also, it's the case with Lothlorien, for that matter, as Fangorn himself reminds us, that it's perilous. But Mirkwood has another characteristic, another quality to it. As you were saying, it's murky. It's not only perilous to humankind, as any forest is, a dark place in the wild, but it's stifling. There's something that's laid upon it. It's black. It's murky. Yeah. And I think that's just that. And I wonder if this is perhaps not. There's too many sort of negations in my proposed sentence. I wonder if it's similar to, the image, the way that Tolkien paints the Mirkwood, if that is perhaps the appropriate kind of image to have for Dante, the beginning of Dante's Inferno.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Right, where he starts out, nel mezzo cammin della nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. This is a translation into modern Italian. It's not the original, but you get the idea. In any case, halfway through the journey of life, like halfway through the journey of the book, at about the midway point we are, we find ourselves now in a dark wood. And what does he say? Ai, quanto a dir qual era cosa dura, esta selva selvaggia ed aspra e forte, che nel pensier rinnova la paura. So it is hard to speak of how, like how difficult, what difficult a thing that this selva selvaggia, this savage wood, there's a sense of savagery to it, wildness, in the sense, not selvatico, because Italian has this word selvatico, which is the way we might think of wild, like wild strawberries, fragole selvatiche, but selvaggio is like savagery, savage beasts, as distinct from merely wild beasts.
I see.
There's
So
something of a malice of sorts, not only unpredictability, but positive danger.
yeah. So the one is wild and sort of, well, that's cool. It's wild, and the other is wild.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's wild. It's going to kill us. So
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good distinction, and I like the connection definitely with Dante. I'm also thinking Tolkien. He certainly was familiar with Shakespeare, although he didn't like all the.
Hmm.
He even wrote about how he didn't like Macbeth. Um, but in Macbeth, there's that great line where Lady Macbeth says, "Hell is murky. Hell is murky," and it's a really wonderful word, murky.
Yeah.
Um, I don't. I'm still going through trying to figure out what is the Anglo. Like I think I told you before this. I didn't do any legwork for this version, so but
Hmm.
looking for the Anglo-Saxon word here, and I think I just found it. The original Anglo-Saxon mirk is it means dark, murky, dark, black, evil. So really, it's just a direct coming down from Anglo-Saxon word, but it also has to do, and is used frequently for black deeds of wickedness. Right, black deeds of wickedness. So
Yeah.
you have this connection not just to murk as in swamps and dark mists at night, but also of evil, like real. Like murk
Yeah.
is not something nice. It's not like a nice misty Irish morning. You know,
Right. It's
it's
not. It's shadowy is at least even
yes,
more benign than that. It's
yeah,
murky, it's gloomy, it's dark. There's muddled muckiness of, you know,
yeah.
when
And
the
doesn't
water's murky, it's not drinkable.
water that's murky is not drinkable? And what does later on they call Sauron? They call him the shadow, right? He is the
Mm,
murk, the
mm,
shadowiness itself. So this is, I mean, it's fascinating that that name would accrue to the woods, the greenwood, the great, and due primarily to the necromancer, Sauron himself.
mhm.
But it's kind of, you got the dragon in the north as well, which doesn't help things at all. So when they drive the dragon out afterwards, Gandalf says it's a really fine thing. By the way, spoiler alert, they drive the dragon out. So sorry. But the idea that this woods becomes this murky, dark, sinister, malicious place, I think fits very well too with his theme of encountering a world that's not nice. It's not all roses and cheerfulness. This image too of forests being hostile. That's something that for us is not as accessible, I think, as even for his generation, because I think our generation generally lives in a very uh, what's the word sanitized. It's a sanitized world that we live in, where we have automatic heat, we have automatic lighting, we can lock our doors, and we're kind of safe and all this. We don't get that sense that the world out there can be a very dangerous for life. In fact, we're encouraged by REI and Land's End and places like that to go out in the world, explore the world, experience the world. Isn't the world a great place? We need to, shave all the whales and all that. But we don't seem to reckon with the idea that they used to reckon with for thousands and thousands of years, that the world is nice, it's beautiful, but there are places in it that are really dark
Mhm.
places. And some creatures and some things are tremendously hostile to human beings. It's like that image of Grizzly Man, the movie Grizzly Man, where the guy goes out to commune with the Kodiak bears, and it doesn't go well, Um, and all the locals, it's funny in that the local Alaskan Inuit guides, when they're interviewed, like, yeah, that guy was crazy. Because they know, you don't go slap Kodiak bears on the nose and expect to live. But I think that there is a tendency among many people in the modern era to think either that the nature is easily ignored, or that nature is somehow our playground, and we can go out there and get cell phone service wherever we go, and not end up like Clark Griswold in Vacation, wandering around in the desert with his pants on his head. Which I don't know for sure, but I can't help but think that false thinking about nature is perhaps a byproduct of our attempt to dominate nature that started back there in the 1700s. That Enlightenment thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because I mean, psychologically, when you can't conquer something, And you can't conquer nature. Man's conquest of nature is a failed
Yeah.
endeavor. And it shouldn't have succeeded either way. It's an awful thing because man's conquest of nature ends up being man's brutal enslavement and destruction of other man.
Mm.
Yeah. But even with that, when you can't conquer something, what do? You make fun of it. You pretend you've conquered it.
Mm.
You make it a playground. You make it a plaything. You literally make fun of, right? You turn it into something like a hacky sack, and you can
Yes.
kick it around, and it's pretty and it's quaint. Maybe maybe you get your thrills climbing, chalking up your hands and climbing a cliff face, and say that
Yeah.
you've been into the wild. And some people go into the wild, but they tend to be the kind of people who respect the reality of it. Whereas the debutante, the dilettante, excuse me, is what I'm looking for. Who goes out, like the REI junkie, goes out camping. You've never really, most people. I have been disillusioned and shocked and awed when I grew up to meet other people who say they've gone camping or they like to go camping. And what they meant by the word was maybe pitching a tent, maybe taking a camper, but going into some big, essentially playground area, some city park type space where a bunch of people sit around little tiny bonfires in metal rings and drink cheap beer and really close quarters with each other.
Yes, that's pleasant, isn't it? That's the sort of
Uncomfortable.
get tossed by the buffalo there in Yosemite National Park, or
Yeah.
is going to end up like the kid in Into the Wild, starving because he crossed the river or whatever it is, or like Clark.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, what I grew up with was like you're out in the what we called roughing it.
Yes.
What I think a lot of people that I've since in my adult years encountered would just not have lived to tell the tale of just really you're out there and you're it's you and the trees and the the animals and everything, and you survive, you live by your wits.
By your wits and by providence and by luck.
Exactly.
As it says at the beginning, with a little luck you'll get through it. This is a Mirkwood. The experience that Bilbo has in this chapter is a direct experience with nature.
Yeah.
Not nature as pleasant paths through Hobbiton, where you go and meet the neighbors, and cheerfully walk in the mornings, but a dark, grueling sort of survival trek. There's some great films about this, by the way. Like I said, Into the Wild is one. The other one is, I think, a movie called Wild. It's about a woman trying to reform her life as she walks on this trail on the West Coast. But there's another one, this movie which is called The Impossible. Naomi Watts and Obi-Wan, Ian McGregor. Oh, and young Spider-Man too is in there too. The guy who plays Spider. But they basically they're tourists who are there in the islands when the Boxing Day tsunami occurred. Back in the 2000-somethings, and they survived the tsunami wave, and it's horrendous. I mean, very well filmed, and an amazing reproduction of that experience. But talk about a direct encounter with just how violent and difficult and dangerous nature can be. It's not the pleasant tourist paradise that they had signed up for originally.
No.
I wonder sometimes, too, whether or not that isn't part of our fear as a society, that the world is going to come to an end, the sense that the environment is going to be lost, we're going to destroy the planet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we fear about that thing because we actually don't have experience with the planet except for in this nice sanitized way. And so we don't see that, on the one hand, we don't see that the planet has perished several times during its history, which is a hard thing to get the mind around anyway. I mean, you look at Snowball Earth or the Pleistocene extinctions, or the extinction of the Jurassic era, or the near-death experience of humanity back when we were down to 8,000 people on the planet, or more recently the starvation of 1317, or all those events where the planet, if we can call it a single entity, was very close to collapse, change and alteration, and hostile to humanity like nothing else. When you start experiencing what the world actually is like without all of your gadgets and whistles and gears, and without the safety net of being able to be rescued at any minute, you start to experience the idea that the world is very dangerous, a very dangerous place, despite all of our technology.
Right.
And that's an eye opener, I think, for most people.
Yeah, and that those things can be taken away and
Mm.
lost. They can collapse. They can fall over so
Mm.
easily, so quickly.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to survive, but I don't want to say that because I think so many people go the direction of like the survivalist, the prepper kind of mindset, and that's not it. Is
Mm.
that you live a richer, fuller, more colorful life when you have a clearer inside outside boundary, but you're embedded in the world that is real and savage as it is, and you're a part of it. I think we have this dissociation from the world. I call it a dissociation from the real world. I think that's why we at one time sort of have a fanciful notion, like a tourist kind of notion of what nature is, and also fear its destruction and its imminent destruction because we think that it has no power, that it's some fragile thing, because we're somehow floating over it in the ether, like above the
Yeah.
Jersey State Turnpike or something. It's just here we are watching the world because we're not embedded in it. We're a ghost floating above it.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. So we
and it's
don't understand the cycles of the world, let alone the possibility that the world can collapse and recover, or even how beautiful the thing is because it is sometimes threatening or threatened. Yeah.
right, because if you live immersed in it, you'll find that you're actually happier and do better, even if your life is shorter, or at least has the risk of being shorter.
Which brings us back to our little hobbit,
Yeah.
everything little hobbit. His journey here is, again, I think, a direct contrast to his love of walks there in the Shire. But all those walks in the Shire are these pleasant, known, he's mapped them all out, decent, non-threatening walks.
Right.
This is kind of, yes, he's experienced the goblins, yes, he's experienced the trolls, but this is really, and the eagles and all that, this is really his first direct, alone experience with the savagery that the world can offer a person. And so I think that it's absolutely necessary that he goes through. Gandalf even says this. It's necessary that you go through. Now, he means you can't go to the north, you can't go to the south because the peril is greater. But it's also necessary because if the journey of the Hobbit in general is a journey about Bilbo becoming autonomous and learning how he is capable of greater things than he thought, then he absolutely has to go through that experience of losing it all, of being in the dark, of being in the tomb. And once out again, once he has a resurrection, so to speak, which, not to give it away, but we've all read the book, the whole bursting out of the barrels at the end is a resurrection scene.
Oh, absolutely.
Once he has that, and yeah, I know he doesn't get in a barrel, but once he has that, he can see the world in a different light. He can see it as something precious, something really precious, not the way Gollum says, but really precious, something that can really be valued and not just neglected or ignored or even controlled. Can't be mapped all the time. The GPS mapping that we do now, I think, is another one of those technologies which I value very much because I get lost a lot. But I think it's a technology which gives us the illusion that somehow we control the thing because we can see it on a satellite.
Right.
There's a great scene I remember out of Clear and Present Danger, I think is the movie, where they're watching in real time this attack that's going on, but then they lose contact with the guys that are being attacked, and we don't know what's going on. We thought we did, but we don't. We've lost control of the situation. And that's so perfect an image because, yeah, you see it on the satellite and you see it going down and you have no control over it, but you think you do because you're watching.
It feels like you do because you can see it.
Yeah.
And Bilbo loses Gandalf. Then they go in and they can't see, much in front of their face. And then when they do stray from the path, and I'm, just skipping ahead through this theme here, they stray from the path. Eventually the dwarves get lost from each other. And Bilbo's alone in the dark, lying down, and he wakes up. He loses consciousness. He wakes up, and he's being wrapped up by a spider. He loses everything. Gets removed from him. Everything gets removed from him, and that's when he finally does this daring deed.
Right.
He slays the spider, faces it head on with the dagger.
there's a manliness that comes to him at that point, a thumos that comes to him that
Hmm.
he was capable of.
Exactly.
But even before that point, he is kind of the dwarves are saying, well, he's got better eyesight. He sees better over the river. They ask him for guidance. He gets put out with them because they're consuming the goods faster than they should, and they won't last. And he's the one who keeps his mind about him when the rest of them are despairing and thinking this is not going to go anywhere. And then they begin to go off the path with the elves, and Bilbo's like, no, don't. So he begins to become the scout leader.
Yeah.
But not yet at that point until, you're right, when he wakes up and he's got the spider wrapping him up. And he's forced by necessity to have to kill this spider. And that's when he gives and it's a very significant scene, he gives his sword a name. It's a nameless sword before that, or at least its name has been lost. And after he does this deed of killing the spider, he names it Sting, which is a name that goes down forever in lore right afterwards. And Sting becomes the tool, not just of Bilbo, but further generations, because Frodo uses it as well. But it's also significant because that's the moment after he christens his blade that he himself gets christened. It's very much like the Siegfried killing the dragon scene. And after Siegfried bathes in the dragon blood, and he can hear all the sounds of the animals. But it's like he's been opened up to a newer world, newer consciousness, almost.
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting thing because although it's attributed to the ring when Bilbo puts it on, that's what follows immediately on this when he follows the spider webs and all this, and he gets to where he puts on the ring so he can't be seen. After he wakes up from killing the spider, he puts on the ring so he can't be seen. He follows um the spider webs to go find the rest of the dwarves who've been captured and strung up like flies.
Yeah.
To age for a while, as you do when you've got freshly slaughtered meat, to be consumed by the spiders later date. Is that he finds he can hear and understand their speech.
Yes.
Right. So
Right.
so there's a parallel there to Siegfried's experience of being
Absolutely.
into that dragon blood. That's a very interesting connection.
Yeah, absolutely. That's And later on he has a similar thing with, he can hear the speech of the elves as they talk amongst themselves, and he has that ability to hear things, especially significantly when he's there at the doorway of down into the dragon's cave, and he hears the thrush. He knows what the thrush is, and he communicates, not as Bard does later on, because Bard can actually understand the real words of the thrush, but he can communicate with the thrush to a certain degree that he tells the thrush, you go tell Bard, go tell somebody. So he gains this ability, which is very much like Siegfried's ability to talk with the animals, the imagery. The other parallel that I know leaps to mind immediately is that parallel of Red Riding Hood. Not talking animals necessarily, but more in the whole woods thing, the whole dark woods and entering into the dark,
leaving the path and all of that. Yeah, that's very interesting.
The ancient world, and really the world all the way up until, I don't know, yesterday, used to think that the woods was not the safe place. As we said before, it was the dark, hostile place. It was not the place where you go and set up a nice little camp among the grizzlies, but rather it was a dark, hostile place, different, set apart from the world of the city, which was the civilized, safe, secure world.
Right.
And so in that conception, when you go into the woods, you're going into a dark miasm of chaos. And I point this out to my students. I said, well, if you've ever been camping at night away from the city, you know what this is like. It's not just dark, it's really pitch dark. And you can hear things that all around you don't know what they are. And there's a tangle in the undergrowth that you can't get through sometimes. And the woods grow as they want. They don't grow according to any plan.
Right.
And there are things in it. There are things in the woods.
Things. And the exact inverse of the world that we want to surround ourselves with, that we are surrounded with now in modern life, where we can see everything we can see everything else with at least the illusion, the feeling of the experience of not being seen ourselves. But in the dark wood, you're surrounded by things that can see you. You are seen,
Yeah,
but you cannot see anything.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's intriguing. I was thinking about the necromancer in the south there of Mirkwood, how he infects the wood and all the land around him, which is a very dragonish thing to do.
Hmm.
But unlike the
Yeah,
dragon,
exactly.
devastate, he just confuses and benights, darkens everything around him.
Hmm.
The dragon, on the other hand, burns, chars, clears away everything so he can see for miles. Because the dragon will direct control over everything
Right,
that
the dragon chooses a high place. He's in the mountain at the top of the lake. He comes
yes.
from above. He comes from above and he burns down everything below it. That's modern man in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we do see that later on when Sauron retreats to his fortress there in Mordor, and he's at the
Yeah.
top of his tower there. And
Yes, Baradur, the Great
right
Eye, watching everything.
over
Panopticon.
these empty plains of Gorgoroth,
Yeah.
which are these flat burning plains. There's no ravines hardly or anything or undergrowth at all in them. So there's a very dragonish quality there. And I think you're right. The modern concept is not to work with nature or to understand nature or even to respect nature, but to char nature, pave the earth, right? Make
Right.
everything flat so you can see for miles and just control everything and put, what is it, not DDT, but Agent Orange. Put Agent Orange on all the plants so you just destroy them
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, Monsanto, thank you, no. Um,
Hmm.
I think that in this case, we've got the desire of Bilbo to see everything. He's had a hood put over him. He's got darkness put over him, so he can't do that at all.
Right.
And again, he's forced to rely on other things, other senses, so to speak, or other abilities.
Hmm.
But like the going back to the Red Riding Hood thing, like the Red Riding Hood,
That's right. Yeah.
that story is one where she goes and she talks to a demonic figure.
Right.
You every fairy story or every story is geared towards an age group, and we tell some stories to younger kids that then they grow into, and we tell
Hmm.
stories to older kids that we would never tell to younger kids.
Hmm.
So those stories that are geared to different ages are like they're beginning to bring young people into the understanding of the world or proper understanding of the world, which is why it's important not to tell bad fairy stories to kids, right?
Exactly.
Stories like Frozen, like which kind of corrupts them,
Which one?
which is surprising with Disney. But the
Mhm.
story
Yeah.
of Red Riding Hood, she goes into the dark forest, which is the tangled thing that you can't control, where there are dark things there. It's a hostile area, and she speaks to the demonic figure of the wolf, and it's that demonic figure of the wolf that then precedes her, gets around in front of her, finds another path, whatever it is, gets to grandma's first, devours grandmother, and then seduces Red Riding Hood and devours her.
Right.
And in the original Grimm story, that's where it ends. It's like, the wolf eats everybody, and so good night, Johnny, and go to sleep.
Right. Good German literature. Everybody dies.
I'm glad they dies.
Good night, kids.
Yeah, very realistic, a very dark kind of thing. But it is a fascinating story in that, first off, she goes into that dark wood and talks to the demon that then destroys her and her grandmother. But there are also no male figures in the story except for the wolf.
Hmm.
There are three female figures. There's no woodcutter, which is a later addition. The man swooping in to save the day, the helpless female. But it's a middle-aged woman, a young girl, and an old woman. So it's past, present, and future.
Right.
And at the end of the story, the past is devoured. That is the young girl, or maybe she's the future. The past, the grandmother, is devoured. The
Right.
future, just the young girl, is devoured. We're left only with the woman, the grown woman, still,
Yeah.
which really does indicate something about that story being a story again of growth and maturity, that coming to grips with the sinister nature of the world, of aspects of the world, coming to grips with the possibility that there are things out there that are very dark that you can't control. Even the red of her hood kind of indicates that innocent thing that hasn't yet been violated.
Right.
Bilbo is kind of like that. He's kind of like Red Riding Hood going into the woods with this naive thought that I've got this. We're all good. I got a ring. Everything's okay. And it does keep him going, but he also has to come to grips with the idea that there are spiders there, dark creatures there.
And the unpredictable happens. It's not in your control, despite your better efforts. There's screw ups along the way that you could have avoided, like pacing your rations a little better. You know, put yourself on meager rations so your oxen you could make it a little bit further on the Oregon Trail. I mean, like, you know, some basic principles here. It'd be all right. And don't drink the water. Okay, so they're not going to drink the water. Don't even touch the water. They're very cautious about it. But despite their best cautions, nonetheless, they successfully cross. They solve that math problem, you know, who's got to go across the boat, you know, river so many times, whatever can get over there. And just as Bomber's coming off, they get distracted. They get overcome by the passion of gluttony, desperation.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid. They want to grasp at something, and so they shoot at this deer that's jumping over. They hit the deer.
Yeah.
When the deer's already on the wrong side of the river.
Yeah.
And they hear it fall. But in the confusion, because of that distraction, because they lose focus on the thing to be done in the moment, they get distracted by this flying passion, a pathane, a sickness, right? You know, something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, Bomber, the fat man, the epitome of the hungry part, right? He loves food. Stumbles and falls backwards into the water. And doing so kicks the boat away, as anybody who's stumbled at a riverbank disembarking from a boat knows how this goes. Anybody who's been in that experience knows what a real pain in the neck it is to go try and retrieve a boat that's now been kicked out into the water. And all of a sudden there he is, and he falls instantly asleep. That is to say, into a stupor.
Mm-hmm.
If they do manage to wake him, he's lost his memory. Everything of the past is erased. And he's asleep. And they've created now another dead weight for themselves. Totally unforeseen, totally unpredictable. In some ways unavoidable. A chaotic moment happened.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I suppose you could say, they're culpable for this, you know, being distracted, shooting at the deer, getting all, you know, instead of just letting it go and focusing on getting everybody off the boat. But it's understandable. But this unforeseen chaos has befallen them, and now one of their number has fallen into complete darkness internally as well. He's lost his memory. He's fallen into the River Lethe.
Yes,
River Lethe connection.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in just that one section. That section right there, where they come up to the river and they can't get across, and they see the boat, or Bilbo sees the boat, and then they try to cross, and then the deer comes, and then Bomber falls asleep. That whole section is very vivid in my imagination, even as a kid. But it's always struck me as that's the most nightmarish point of the whole journey, really, for me.
It is, yeah.
It's so filled with mythological images. Like you said, the river, which is like Lethe. Mm-hmm. Here, which is something directly out of Celtic mythology.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
Yeah. The boat, the image of the boat, you know, like Charon's boat, or the boat of the boat of Tristan and Isolde. It's like this one thing after another that Tolkien packs into this one section. Even the fact that the dwarves try to kill the deer. That's, if I'm not mistaken, there was a Celtic legend of Aran. And Aran was the god of the hunt. And if you killed his deer or killed his dogs, he would come after you. He'd hunt you. So there's that. But there's also the image of Artemis, that if you killed Artemis's deer, they were sacred to her. And down.
I mean, there's the killing of a deer. Especially if you're not the king. I mean, killing the king's deer. That's it. You stole the deer from the park of the king. Now you've got to be hanged. That's how the song goes. It's the rules, these tragedies all around this idea, and they can hear the hunt going on. People are, you know, the king, the elf king. This is a deer that belongs to the elf king. Essentially, they're on the hunt, and you've gone and slain the deer. Like, Dad, don't do that. Bad, no.
Hmm. And they have gotten to the point now, because they've eaten the rations too early. They've gotten to the point where they're beginning to really feel the pang of hunger, and it's driving them a little nuts.
Mm.
So, to start at the beginning of that section, I find it interesting that they come to a river that crosses the path. Because wouldn't there be a bridge, or wouldn't there be a ford or something at that point? You'd think, but it isn't.
There's no bridge.
Check, as they say in the text. First, we'll check of their path.
Mm-hmm.
And that's striking to me, not only because it seems out of place, but also because the image of the river crossing is another thing out of mythology that appears frequently. You cross a river, you're into a new boundary, you're into a new world. Beowulf, for instance, who crosses over the sea in order to get to the Herald.
Mm-hmm.
So they're crossing a boundary here, but they can't cross because it's too deep. And they look into the darkness, the murk, and only Bilbo can see a boat. And they try to get that boat, which itself is strange. Who tied that boat up? Why is that boat there?
Right. And it's on the further side.
On the further side. You know, what is going on? All these questions came up even when I first was having this read to me as a kid. I'm like, how did that get there? Which, by the way, as a side note, one of the wonders that I find of reading mythology is that it raises those questions. How does that happen? How did that work? You know, how did they get that thing inside that egg? Or why does the prince have this in order to get the princess? Or, you know, why does this creature come when you do X, Y, or Z? Mm-hmm. Those questions in mythology are never answered, and they don't need to be answered if you're going to be really doing mythology, because you just have to know
what you're about.
You have to. And so this whole section here is harkening back to that, because it raises these questions. But once they get that boat, even, it's not so easy getting across, because they can only go across in pairs, like entering into Beorn's house 2 by 2. Mm-hmm. And they get to the other side, and that's when that white deer shows up. And again, the question, where does it come from? Why is it there? What does it mean that it's white? Why is it trying to get across the river to the other side? You know, what is up with that? As you seem to have suggested that it was an image of chaos, or its appearance brought up an image of chaos. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is part of the imagery of the white deer in general, or just this instance?
I think it's in part this instance. In that, I will say this: it's the white stag. It's not the questing beast, something like that. There's this internal chaos where it sounds like that, the baying of 100 hounds from within its belly or something. No, this is the white stag. This is a noble creature. It itself does not represent chaos, but it's the divine comes crashing in on them, and their response to it is chaotic. They are not prepared to encounter the divine. They're not prepared to encounter the luminous. And what they do with the white stag, in at least some legends, you've got a stag that appears. This is especially true in later Christian legends. Somebody like Saint Hubert, Saint Eustace, Eustachio, the Jägermeister deer symbol, right? The cross in his antlers, right?
Yeah.
But you encounter the stag, and there's this theme that the stag, there's a moment of pause. The stag stops and looks. There's peace that's made between the hunter and the stag. The stag, in some versions, offers himself to the hunter. There's something of this generosity that I believe is meant to be given in this symbolism, because the divine is something that is to be received, to be quested after, to be sure. Hence the theme of hunting the white stag. But it's a quest, and it's not something to be grasped, to be shot, to be taken.
Yep.
But to be received when it offers itself. And here, in some way, it's offered itself to them, at least with the encounter, and they've scrambled, they've shot at it, and they've totally missed the mark. Yeah.
And they do it in a wild, uncontrolled way.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's almost like a gang of teenage savages or something encountering something beautiful for the first time, like Clockwork Orange or something like that. Bananas on this poor thing, and so naturally it would jump away. I love the image too that this represents the divine in the midst of the dark, oppressive, murky nature of the wood. you get something which is completely anachronous. It's the white beauty of light that comes out of nowhere, comes out of the darkness, and it could be something which offers some guidance through the rest of the remainder of the forest as a guide. It could be a shapeshifter. I mean, we've encountered that before with Beorn.
Right.
It could be something which is directly connected to the gods that rule over Middle Earth. The gods of light that rule over Middle Earth. But the dwarves don't take that into account at all. They immediately start shooting at it. There's not even a moment where they, like you said, between the Jägermeister and the deer, there's a moment where they recognize each other. And like in the movie Deer Hunter or something, they don't kill the thing because they see it as majestic. And, but the dwarves don't do that. They immediately start firing arrows away at this creature. It reminds me, too, not just of the American Indian, the Native American tendency to thank the deer for its gift when they kill it. They see the animal coming to them as a gift to prevent starvation. But it also, that great poem of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where in that poem the sailors are stuck in the horse doldrums there in the Atlantic Ocean, and they can't get out, and that it's the sun's burning down on them, and they're all dying basically of the heat and the lack of water and the lack of food. That's where the line water everywhere and not a drop to
drink. Yeah.
So they're all suffering, they're all dying one after the other. And the reason that happens is because they were earlier trapped in the ice of the South Atlantic. And in the midst of the ice, when they didn't think they could get out, here comes this albatross and the beautiful white bird that guides them out. And when the albatross comes, the ice breaks up and the ship can get free. And they're all like, yay, thanks be to God, he's gotten us out of this state of spiritual stasis. And then the main character says, I don't know why I did this, but I shot it. I shot the bird. I shot the albatross. And that's what causes them then to get stuck in the malaise of the horse doldrums, which is a very similar thing to this. Not that Bilbo is the main character, but the dwarves act like the main character in the albatross story. And you've got the same image of whiteness coming out of the mirk, the albatross
flying overhead.
And it's like a divine gift that then is taken for granted. I can't help but think that this is, to some degree, the image of seeing the world as beautiful and precious and divinely inspired, divinely created. And you can either take it for granted and shoot at it, dominate it, or you can see it as gift and seek help and advice from it. You got your hand to it, so to speak. I don't know why. I just thought of that scene too from All Quiet on the Western Front at the very end where he reaches out for the butterfly. Remember that scene in the movie? I don't know if you've seen that, black and white. Great scene at the very end, based on a novel. And it's World War One, so it's all this horrible stuff. And at the very end, he reaches out for this butterfly. And it's German, so it's a very cynical story. When he reaches out for the butterfly, that's the moment that the main character gets killed. But he has a midst of this dark gray. He's lost all his illusions about how noble it is to die for Germany and all this. He suddenly sees this one spatch of color in a blue butterfly, and he reaches out to it because it's so beautiful. And of course, he gets killed at the moment. But I guess my thought was that it's a similar reaction to the divine presence suddenly in the midst of desolation. That in the midst of desolation, you see something beautiful, and that beautiful thing that's sent to you by the divine can either be taken for granted or dominated or destroyed. Or it can be something you honor and respect and follow as a guide out from the murk of the Inferno, one or the other. And let me touch on something else, because that also sparks another idea. You touched on the idea that Bombur is the one that falls. And yes, he's the largest, he's the fattest of the whole crew, so he does represent that gluttonous aspect of a person. And then he falls into that deep sleep, almost like the magical sleep of Adam, or the magical sleep of Lancelot, or something like that. And dead weight to everybody else around him. So there's a sort of comic aspect to it, but it's also not comic in that this is a problem. Not only are we starving and we're lost and it's dark and there are things out there, but now we've got to carry this 2-ton guy around with
Yeah.
us. Where how? So then the question would be, how does the appearance of the divine thing and the reaction that we have to kill that divine thing, how does that result in not only the oh gosh, not only the gluttonous aspect falling asleep, but then the gluttonous aspect becoming a burden? I just, again, spark in the head.
I mean,
Movie,
say again? Sorry,
movie
what's the...
spark in the head. It sparked another image from a movie, which I'll bring up in a minute. But go ahead.
I said the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, I like that you drew the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, because, of course, what is the main character's fate? What does he have to do now that he shot the albatross?
Wears it around his neck.
He has to wear it around his neck, the
Yeah.
albatross around your neck, which has become a byword and now forgotten, since then. But for a while, it was a thing that people said. It was a symbol that meant something. And now they have to bear the burden of Bomber, right? And in some ways, they have to carry this around, this curse, as the natural consequence of what of what befell, of how they responded to the inbreaking of the divine.
Wow, that's really cool. There's that scene.
Sorry, it just dawns on me, because when he finally does wake up. So they've been carrying him around, dragging him around, and he does wake up. You're gonna slap him, right? Eventually, it's like days later, he comes to, and I've been having this beautiful dream of all this banquet, and all he can talk about is how his wonderful dream of this divine and like banquet. And then they see the ignis fatuis, right? They see these mirages off in the distance, off the path.
Yeah.
These glimmering lights. The oh great, what's this? Those wonderful spiders, the will o' the wisp kind of. They see these will o' the wisps, going around, and that draw them off the path, because what they hear is the elves banqueting. They see
Yes.
the fire and the joy and all this, and Barbara's like, "Oh, that's just like my dream. We gotta go after it."
And they all
so
say,
he wakes up. They say, "Shut up!" But he wakes, but then it becomes this thing, this obsession for them all, and so it spreads again. So he became a curse for them. They had to bear, and then it becomes a temptation, the very thing that drives him off the path to follow after these.
I love
these mirages.
how Tolkien works, because you could read this as just kind of comical or just another sort of incident along the way. But why does he use the image of eating, of hunger? That's a really powerful image. We talk about hunger as a physical hunger, but then there's a greater hunger of the spiritual or the emotional hunger, that we long for. We long for compassion. We long for the divine, things of beauty in this world. And it's a hunger which is inextricable from a conscious being. Not just other conscious beings in the universe, they probably suffer the same thing to some degree. To be conscious is to hunger, because you always hunger for something else beyond. And so in this instance, we're talking physical hunger, but it represents that hunger for the beautiful and the divine. It's not goblins partying in the woods, it's elves, which is a beautiful, divine, elegant thing that now these dwarves are, all of them, infected with that hunger, which before they thought was bad, but now is really bad, especially after Bombur awakes. But even Bombur's dream is essentially, it's a dream of heaven, isn't it? Because when it comes down to it, we all think of heaven as being pancakes in the morning with mom and dad,
Right.
That's basically what it is. You could talk high philosophy about how it's going to be an eternal conversation, or we're all going to be sitting around talking philosophy. Yeah, sure. But if it's philosophy without beer and pancakes, then what the hell's the point? In that other world where we don't suffer diabetes and we don't suffer penury when we can't afford beer, will be a world where we are invited to the banquet and we can sit and talk and enjoy each other's company. And that's what Bombur dreams about, and he does so after the fact of everybody but Bombur shooting at the deer. Huh. Wow. I was thinking, Cameron, too. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I wonder if, because what befalls them then when they do leave the path to approach the fires of the elven banquets, is that there's an explosion of chaos. Dark, the fire's kicked out. These are, the magic. It's almost like magic, poof, ash, thrown everywhere. They can't see, and they're all confused and they're lost in the dark. if that's not the direct contrapasso to their response of the deer breaking in on them, had they responded differently to the deer, they would have been able to enter into the banquet of the elves, which is not unlike, again, the banquet, that's this luminous banquet in the dark forest there. It's very Grail. This is the Grail meal. The Grail is passing by. And here we are with Percival again, and he was just crossed the river, just like Percival. And here we are, and instead of responding rightly to the deer, right, they responded with chaos and they shot it. And they can't even get it because it's on the other side. Now when they approach the, if we will, the Grail banquet, it's taken from them and they're blinded. They can't enter into it.
I can't, I mean, I sometimes have to check myself and say, is it simply because I've been reading a certain text that I'm thinking this way? But then again, I'm always reading Arthur. So when is it not affecting how I think? I think that the Grail thing is an absolutely perfect analogy. Not only did Tolkien know the Grail and want to write Arthurian cycle, but it was something deeply embedded in the whole imaginative world of the British anyway.
No, absolutely.
The image that comes to mind to me is the Lancelot scene, where Lancelot tries to put out his hand to the Grail and is shut out immediately from the pageant and locked out of the chapel. He can't get into the chapel. For Lancelot, that's due to, as it says, his sin with Guinevere. Okay? In other words, he seems to have violated a trust with Arthur and violated a sacred trust that's given to him of the vision of what beauty is. But he has also done something else, which is to violate a trust with a real woman, Elaine, who really does love him, versus an imaginary woman that comes out of the darkness and then skips over the river, so to speak, with him.
Right.
Something that he shouldn't be shooting at.
Right. He's shooting deer in the king's garden.
Yeah, right. Not to use a euphemism there, but yes, because of that violation, because of that sin, he is shut out from the Grail quest, and that makes his longing for the Grail quest so much more piquant that the destruction of the destruction of the Round Table and the Civil War and even the loss of his own physical prowess is all of it acceptable by the end of his life, because he's longing for something far more than that. At the end of Lancelot's life, when he dies as a poor monk, he dies happy. He dies happy.
Exactly. He finds the fulfillment of his chivalric vocation as a knight by becoming a monk.
Yeah, right. Because by that point, he's realized what really is important, what really is the thing that ought to be valued. Not to go too tangential here, but my wife was pointing out that in the movie The Natural, the Robert Redford movie, which is a retelling of the personal story, that character who has everything lost because he gets shot in the early part of the movie, he then gains it back, not by becoming a great baseball star, but by realizing that he has a son and a wife, basically, that he can cherish. And he can pass on to them. And so the last scene in that movie where he's in the field with his son, playing catch with his own son, is so powerful a scene, because he, like Lancelot should have done, he has achieved the Grail in his real form. And this, okay, now I got to bring it back to Hobbit. In this story, that's what Bilbo is doing himself. He is on a quest, right? And the quest is to find the Grail, not the physical cup, although he actually does find the cup.
That is, in fact, what he gets out from the dragon's lair. In case we missed it.
In case you weren't paying attention. But the real is to find that Grail of himself, to find the Grail of what he really is and what he really values. And so that's this scene here allows him in some ways to see what beauty really looks like. And I got to move to the next important section of this chapter, which is where he is told to climb a tree by the dwarves.
Yes.
Bombur's still asleep. They've already gone through the whole white deer thing. Bombur's still asleep. And they said, we don't know where we are. You know, what are we going to do? We don't know what we're doing. So somebody has to climb a tree.
Right, we can get reception and look at his GPS where we are on the map.
Good reception for your GPS. Bilbo, climb a tree. So poor Bilbo goes up this tree. And again, it's kind of it's comic and all this, and it does point to the fact that the dwarves are relying on him more. But also, it is an indicator of this idea that Tolkien seems to be working out, which is the valuing of beauty after long deprivation. Yeah. Bilbo was prompted by his ids, whatever we want to call these dwarves, prompted by his ids to do something to try and alleviate the situation, to look out above the Minnesota clouds and see whether there's a world out there or not, still.
Right.
And can I just read that passage? Because that's such a
beautiful
passage to me. This is somewhere, I don't know, it's maybe one third through the text. Thorin says, "Is there no end to this accursed forest?" That's my Thorin voice. "Somebody must climb a tree and see if he can get his head above the roof and have a look around. The only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path." Of course, somebody meant Bilbo. They chose him because, to be of any use, the climber must get his head above the topmost leaves, and so he must be light enough for the highest and slenderest branches to bear him. Poor Mr. Baggins had never had much practice in climbing trees. So again, why do they choose him? Right? Because he doesn't really climb trees. That's not what hobbits do.
Right.
But they hoisted him up into the lowest branches of an enormous oak that grew right out into the path, and up he had to go as best he could. He pushed his way through the tangled twigs with many a slap in the eye. He was greened and grimed from the old bark of the greater boughs. More than once he slipped and caught himself just in time. And at last, after a dreadful struggle in a difficult place where there seemed to be no convenient branches at all, he got near the top. All the time he was wondering whether there were spiders in the tree and how he was going to get down again, except by falling, which you do when you climb a tree. You get up there, you're like, hey, and you get up to the top, you're like, okay, now how do I get down? Because it's perilous, right? Okay. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of leaves, and then he found spiders all right, but they were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarves shouting up at him from far below, but he could not answer, only hold on and blink. The sun was shining brilliantly, and it was a long while before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all around him a sea of dark green, ruffled here and there by the breeze, and there were everywhere hundreds of butterflies. It's a great image right there. I expect they were a kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the tops of oak woods, but these were not purple at all. They were very dark, velvety black, without any markings to be seen. He looked at the black emperors for a long time, and enjoyed the feel of the breeze in his hair and on his face. But at length, the cries of the dwarves were now simply stamping with impatience down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. Gaze as much as he might, he could see no end of the trees and the leaves in any direction. His harp that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the feel of the wind sank back into his toes. There was no food to go back to down below. So that passage to me is, there are wonderful passages throughout this chapter, but that's one of three great passages in this chapter. The first being the one with the white stag. Here he comes up to the top of the trees, and what does he see? He sees some small spiders, but they're kind of interesting. They're not terrifying, they're interesting. And then he sees these butterflies. Butterflies are traditionally the image of the divine. It's like bees and butterflies are the two creatures that speak mostly of the divine presence in the ancient world. The butterfly is also the image of transformation, change, and alteration. So that when you're going through that transformation from a larval stage, you enter into the chrysalis, and then you emerge as the butterfly, which is the divine creature with the Giotto type wings, and therefore he is seeing these beautiful creatures which are emblematic of his own transformation to a certain degree. Yeah. And they're black, but they're beautiful, black creatures, not murky black down below, but beautiful creatures. And even around them is a sea of green, which you don't see down there on the floor. The floor of the forest, it's all dark and dark wood and everything's blackened, but you don't see the green, you don't see the life. And up here, he's got light and life, and there's this world out there, breeze and openness. He is the only character of the society that is able to see above the murk of the world. And there's that most transcendent quality that occurs. I mean, literally, it's a transcendent. It transcends the normal.
Literally gone above.
And he sees it just for a moment. The idea that there's still freedom out there and light and happiness and joy beyond all that smoke that we have to endure. It's a great image, I think. Wonderful image.
And I think an interesting thing about this part is that it ends with him, having to go down after seeing, nope, like it's beautiful, but there's no end in sight to the murk once I get back down there. And we're told by the narrator, however, that they were nonetheless closer to the end than they think. But he cannot see it, not because of the murk now, because he's up in the realm of the divine, of luminosity, of clarity, of beauty. And he's there, but not for the murk, but for his natural limitation of his mortal self, is unable to see the end of the path because they're in the narrator tells us he's unable to see because they're in a sort of bowl, a sort of divot.
Yeah, what do you mean?
So he can't see over the ridge because none of us, even at our most clear, at our most lucid moments, can't see beyond the natural boundaries of the present where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and we're faced with two options at that point: despair. Oh my gosh, it is unending. There's no end. It's all more of the same, one damn thing after another. Or trust and hope to the path that's been laid out for us. Because had they continued on, they'd arrive at the destination sooner or later. In fact, sooner rather than later. But instead they despair. And that despair, rather than respect the limitations of sight in their natural position, that are natural to their position or to our position of being, natural and not in fact supernatural ourselves, rather than respecting those limits and continuing on nonetheless in hope, not optimism, but hope, they resort to that graspingness, that urge to, we have to take this into our own hands,
right?
Be listless and begin to leave the path, because there's no other way out. You panic like an animal in a trap, and that should be game over, right?
Here's something really, really important, which you just touched on. My father used to write about how the Lord of the Rings, as he saw it, was all about despair. Okay, every character in the Lord of the Rings wrestles to some degree with despair. And my father noticed that despair is not being able to see that what you're enduring has a terminus. And therefore, you must take charge of it yourself. You have to grapple with it yourself, grasp it, and no longer trust that things will turn out okay, or that the not in a Pollyannish sort of way, but that the Lord has a plan, that something's going to happen that is positive here. This image of the dell, is something which, again, is one of those ancient images. I mean, I'm reminded of, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. It's not, yes, though I walk through the dark place. It's the valley of the shadow of death. Same image here, shadow, right? The necromancer, valley, a dell, death. They all think they're going to die. It's the exact same image. And if you want to go back even further, the Egyptians used to conceive of their world, the whole world, as a dell, a valley. It was bounded by mountains on either side, so it was essentially a valley. You couldn't see over the edge to the other side. The shape of the bull horns that was also in Minoan culture was not bull horns. It was the image of the valley of existence, that we are in a valley situation. This same image shows up even in Plato, where he talks about how we are frogs sitting around a pond in a deep valley, right? Yeah. Can't see over the edge, and it's dark, and it's a murky. And if we don't have a sense that there is a providential nature to things, and again, not Pollyanna, this is not like, oh, it's all going to work out for the best, but rather a sense that somehow even the worst suffering we're going through, even starving in the middle of the forest, is itself part of the deal. It's part of the plan. It's part of the thing that's necessary to effect the change.
Right.
Enduring the Minnesota winter is part of enjoying the Minnesota summer, you know? And if you don't have that sense, then you're right. It's just one damn thing after another. And that's why when he gets back down again, I love this little passage that the dwarves are really ticked. They don't know what to do. They don't see any end out of it. And they said they didn't care tuppence about the butterflies. They're only made more angry when he told them of the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb up and feel, because they're weighed down by this.
Because they're earth spirits. They can't crawl up there.
They can't get up high enough to be able to see anything like this. And they don't give a damn about butterflies. What are you telling us, butterflies in the midst of this? You know, that's like creating poetry in the middle of Auschwitz. Who would do that? You know, it's an amazing passage, I think, and it's a passage too which is transformative. Mirkwood is like a generator for transforming Bilbo. Okay. Mm-hmm. He has been certainly on this quest for the grail of himself, and he has been transformed already by other things. But I think this is where you see the real transformation of this character, because he goes in all by himself, wizard left behind, and he's transformed first by that stag thing, and then it's reaches a sort of apex where he goes literally up that tree, transcends, and comes down again. And then it's transformed in character when, in the next instance, he meets the spiders after those feasting scenes. Right. That's where he begins to take charge of his own life, and he begins to be the man, the Beorn that he should be, rather than the little timid hobbit, the rabbit character.
In fact, he casts off skin. I mean, it's in a small way, but the spiders begun to wind him up, to bind him, to clothe him in something, and he casts off the webbing. This is the beautiful image of the... Oh gosh, I wish I could share right now. There's in the Cappella di San Severo in Napoli, in Naples. There's a number of very beautiful marble sculptures. One in particular is called the Disengannoed. It's the Disenchantment has a different connotation in English, but to be inganno is to be deceived, to be in a web of lies, to be in darkness. And this is it's one of those very delicate marble, that somehow you're able to carve, to sculpt like this filigree threads, but it's a man being, emerging, an angel, uncovering a man from within like a fisherman's net, a fishing net. So he's got this net that's being peeled from his eyes, and his face is peering out like this, and he's being freed from this net, from this web. Wow. And it's called the disenganno, so he's the undeception.
Yeah.
It's coming out like that. And so he's casting off these webs, and in not as profound a way, but in, I think, a subtle way, we see Bilbo do that when he comes to, he slays the spider, and he peels himself free from the webs. He's now changing his skin, in a manner of speaking. Yes, he is, isn't he? I mean, I don't think it's at all a bad analogy. I think it's a great analogy. In fact, if you can, send me the link to an image if you are able. Mm-hmm. I'll post it right here in the video.
Il Disenganno, or The Release from Deception, was produced in 1752. The sculptor is Francesco Quairolo. He was an Italian-Genoese-born sculptor in Rome and Naples during the Rococo period. This from an article by Kelly Richmond Abdu in mymodernmet.com. The Il Disenganno shows a fisherman being released from a net by an angel. It can be seen in Cappella San Severo in Naples. Though at first glance the structure appears to be composed of intertwined rope, a closer look reveals that the open mesh material is made entirely from a single block of marble. The statue depicts a scene that is both biblical and allegorical. For example, the flame on the angel's head represents human intellect, while the globe signifies worldly passions. The angel stands on a globe as he untangles the man from a net
and floats above exquisite drapery. According to the Museo Capella San Severo, the net symbolizes sin. As the angel sets the man free, he rids him of his wrongdoings and introduces him to the Bible, which rests at his feet. In order to emphasize the idea of liberation, Quarolo adorned the open pages of the book with a Latin passage that reads, in English, "I will break thy chain, the chain of the darkness and long night, of which thou art a slave, so that thou might not be condemned with this world."
Yeah.
That disentangled is another one of these great images. It's connected to mirk. It's connected to the image that we get of escaping the fowler's net, as it says in the Bible, being freed of that. Not in a Jungian sense, the Jungians, God bless them, they do a lot of good stuff, but they used to suggest that anything that weighs you down, get rid of it, right? Any emotional attachments, any responsibilities, get rid of it because your mind has to be free.
Jung's got problems, but
bullshit.
exactly.
That's not the point. Not to get rid of anything that weighs you down. The point is to recognize what things are you doing or engaging in that are themselves sin, disastrous, destructive. That's the point. That's very close to my heart. That actually happened with my parents, that they almost split up because my mom, who was in a Jungian community at the time before we were Catholic, was told, I think you need to divorce your husband because your family's weighing you down. You need to be free. And that's when she went. She took my sisters and she went down to where they had their honeymoon because she was so confused at the time. She was in a net. She didn't know what she was doing. And while she was down there, and I remember this as a kid, being terrified, even as a young guy, that my mom was gone. Right. So then she called my dad after a day and she said, "Come down and join me down here." And we all went down, and that was the first of several visits down there as a family. We went after that yearly as a pilgrimage down there to Natural Bridge, Kentucky, because she recognized that they were wrong. They were wrong. It wasn't getting rid of her husband that was going to make her free. It was getting rid of those damn Jungians.
Right.
But they had cast, I think, whether they intended or not, they had cast a spell over her. We talk about spells now as sort of Expelliarmus, zap. That's not what a spell is. As you pointed out before, spell is a story that we tell, and the story can sometimes be something that infects the mind or frees the mind. And if we tell a story that infects the mind, we end up being necromancers, warlocks,
death magicians.
Death magicians. If we tell a spell that liberates or frees, we are wizards. We are people that allow others to have autonomy and be free of those spider webs that entangle their own minds.
Right.
I think in our modern era we have too many necromancers and not enough wizards, if I can use that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly it. And that's the beautiful thing, is that story, again, to get into the etymology of things, that story, the ancient word for story, ancient English word for story is spell. Yeah. Spell means a story, a narrative, a tale. And this is something that's overlooked, I think, in Christian theology, is in the Gospel of John, the very end of his prologue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is with God, and the Word was God. Right? That's how it begins. But it ends with then, the Word became flesh, and so on. And no one has ever seen God, the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made him known. Some variation of that, he has revealed him, whatever, is the common English translation. But this is not what it says. It says, and I forget the exact Greek word, but the Latin I recall, and that is ipse narravit. He has narrated him. No one has ever seen God, the only Son who is in the bosom of the Father. He has narrated him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he has told the story. He has, I bet you anything, if, I don't know if Alfred had a translation of this or something, but he would, somehow, no one has ever seen God, the only Son who is in the bosom of the Father. He has spelled him.
Huh.
It's got to be some variation of that, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about weaving a spell, speaking something into being, telling a story and weaving that. And the stories we tell, like you said, are either freeing and liberating and life-giving spells, the stories that we tell, or they're black magic, they're death
Yeah.
magic, and they can entrap and kill us.
Yeah. Right. Right. And of course, that passage of John goes on to that wonderful section that says, "The light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not."
Right.
To use the James translation, of course. but the meaning there being that the light in the midst of the darkness has shined, like the white
Shone.
like the white stag, and not only has the darkness not surrounded it, because that stag has leapt over the river and gone away, but the darkness doesn't understand the light. Not only does it not comprehend it as in surrounding it, it doesn't comprehend it as like, I don't understand. What the heck? What are you? It's almost like the darkness, it operates in such a way that it can't conceive that there would be anything beyond darkness.
Right.
Strangely enough.
Yeah.
And that, again, if only the dwarvish thing, that's perfect for the dwarves. The dwarves can't even imagine that there's something beyond all this darkness, day after day darkness. The character who can see above, Bilbo, sees above partly because he makes that journey up, but also because I don't want to say that Tolkien is making a moral here, but I think he is making somewhat of a moral here. The person who has the vision of the divine is the person who can see above, right? That you have to have a vision that there is something greater, that there is a providential nature to this existence. Otherwise, it is one damn thing after another, and the track record of humanity is hideous, and we're basically just a meat sack on bones, and the journey through the mirk is never ending. Just occasionally a piece that you're shut out from.
And in fact, that's interesting. I mean, he's not, I don't know, I want to say alone of the party. It's not technically true, because Thorin, we find, wasn't in fact captured by the spiders either. That's because he's been in a dead sleep, enchanted sleep by the elves.
Yes.
But he's royalty, so he's subject to different rules, maybe something, I don't know. But among the rest of the party, in any case, Bilbo, who's seen the light, who's transcended and seen above, is the one who's not entirely overcome by the spiders. He's not hung up as a sack of meat on bones to dry.
Yeah, how does that work? How is it that
he doesn't totally despair?
Yeah,
right?
He doesn't totally despair.
He
right.
fights off the spider when it comes to wrap him up. He comes to and he slays it with sting. And then he goes to rescue the others.
That raises the big question of why spiders. People have often said, well, Tolkien hated spiders or Tolkien hated wolves.
Yeah, he had a bad experience or something.
Bad experience. Traumatized. Yeah, okay, whatever. I don't think that's an adequate answer. I think Tolkien is something which is deeply embedded in our consciousness, in the same way that serpents are deeply embedded in our consciousness. And wolves, we fear wolves as humans. We fear them for a very good reason. There was a time when wolves
were natural prey.
There's a time when serpents were a real threat to human beings. They still are, but there was a time when, have you ever seen these like serpent matings when they go nuts in the spring? You've ever seen pictures of those? Some scary crap right there.
Seen some of that live, yeah.
No thanks.
It's Medusa head.
Yeah, it is Medusa. Yeah, right. Yeah, or like in Texas where they have these rattler pits. In the middle of it. You overturn a little cave in the rocks and it's filled with thousands of these rattlers. Yeah, and either you get them out and make some good rattler chili, or you back away really slow. My point being is that there are these places in the world that are so dangerous to us.
Yeah.
And again, spiders were really dangerous to us. It's not just that he was scared of them as a boy, it's that they are deeply embedded in our consciousness as dangers to us.
They are, because I'll say two things. One is in the natural sense, and the other is we're going to dive into some deep spider culture You know, it's a second layer. One is at our normal size and a spider's normal size, ordinary spider size, ordinary human size, right? They're smaller than us, but they're dangerous. Venomous spiders are dangerous. You can't see them. Nobody's bit by a spider in a foreseen kind of way. It's always a surprise, you know. You know, because you don't go looking for it. You're just there, and this small thing bites you. I mean, this is much like the viper, you know, the viper image. Is it sneaks up on you? It snakes up on you, and it bites you secretly. And so the spider, and they're a terrifying thing. And I'll recount a personal story.
Yeah.
Once I bought. So this is when we were living in the countryside in Minnesota, in whatever this old country house. Now, those of you not from the frozen north or who haven't picked up on the theme of cold and dark and wet, this is not a place you find black widow spiders. Right, black widows don't exist up there.
Yeah.
Now, we happen to have recently, so we went down to the cities and we went grocery shopping and we bought some artichokes at Whole Foods in St. Paul. So you know who to blame if anything ever bad happens. Whole Foods in St. Paul. We bought our artichokes, craving for artichokes. And so, like the dwarves, you know, we felt like we were starving. We bought artichokes, among other things. And it's a long drive. It was a 2.5-hour drive back. We didn't go just for the artichokes. We had other business in the cities. And when we came back up, so that we went grocery shopping. The groceries were sitting in the bags in the trunk the whole day, the whole drive back up. The grocery bags were sitting under the feet of our children for the 2.5-hour drive home. And then we bring the groceries in, and the grocery bags are saying, it's the end of a long day. You leave the bags out in the kitchen on the floor, and you just get to bed. We're all tired. We're exhausted. Well, the next morning, my wife comes down the stairs, and what does she see? But crawling across the floor, a black widow spider.
Oh no! Oh no!
Shouts, throws, I don't know what was it, hand, like a shoe or a phone or something, bam, smash it. What the hell was that? You know, wakes up, we come down, we look, we go, and, you know, open up, you know, what the hell? These things don't live here naturally, right? This is a venomous spider that has been sitting in the truck beside our children this whole time, right? So, okay, where's this coming from? You know, quick think, look through the bags, pull up, okay, there's the artichokes, and open the bag of artichokes, out crawls another one. And it's sure enough, black widow spider. Didn't see wrong the first time. It wasn't a wolf spider that we misinterpreted, wasn't, you know, some whatever. And this thing, and it's crawling out. Actually, kill it right away. Crack open some of these things, and they're crawling with egg sacs. All just packed with egg sacs of black widow spiders. And so you've got this nasty, disgusting, venomous, deadly venomous thing that had my wife not come down the stairs at just the right moment and seen the thing, then you have this thing crawling around the house. I mean, we would have been living in, you know, what do you do? You're living in terror at that point or something. You know, because how we discovered the sacs and not the mother spiders, you know, that you don't know, right? And then the realization as it sinks in, like these things have been sitting with you in the car the whole ride up, you know, in the backseat. And to give a sense now of a sudden, why spiders? Because they're this deadly, creepy, sneaky thing that can accompany you without your knowledge until the opportune moment and then pounce upon you. Yeah. Now, I'm somewhat, you know, we're dwelling between historical reality, psychological perception, and sort of, you know, the myth and arachnophobia world here, you know, how that all connects. But that's the subjective experience. But now, why spiders? What does a spider do beyond just like what a serpent does or something? A spider injects venom into its victim, and before it's dead, it sucks the venom breaks down the internal parts of its prey, and to turn it into a liquid, so that it ingests it like some sick Slurpee through the straws of its own fangs. It sucks dry the innards of the thing, so it dissolves it from the inside, liquefies it, and eviscerates it. It sucks it out. The liquid literally sucks the life out of the thing. So we've got something very sinister, but also very symbolic in terms of what the spiders are doing. They bind you and they suck out the life from within you in this vampiric sort of way.
Yeah, and they also trap their foes and they leave spider filth everywhere, as he calls it elsewhere in the book.
Yeah.
The webs are not, I mean, we look at them as beautiful gossamer webs in the morning dew. Yeah, that's beautiful, but normally spiders are covering things in grayish filth.
If you've ever been up to an abandoned attic,
Oh.
it's just disgusting. Like, and I'm not even talking about the human room, stuff and clutter. But the webs, it's chaotic, it's dark, and they're, like you said, they're gray and they're sticky, and they're just nasty, and they're everywhere. It's filth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, your story beats my story by a long chalk, but my story was that I got bit by a recluse down there in Dallas, and my whole arm here got purple, which that was all it was. It was a hard thing in the middle, and it was all purple, like from wrist to elbow was purple. Jeez. Because the recluse, it rots the flesh. Yeah. It's a what is it called? A necro whatever.
Yeah, some sort of necrotizing venom.
Yeah. And normally that means you have to literally cut the flesh out in order to save the rest of the arm.
Spreads.
It spreads. Oh, gosh. So honestly, if Tolkien did have a traumatic child experience, if that was the reason, I don't discount that at all. Because it's a traumatic experience just to even talk about the bloody things. Spiders are great in that they keep the population of other animals, other creatures down, bugs and things like that, but they are not something that I can see myself saying, oh, what a lovely creature to keep around the house as a pet. That's not the case. Highly symbolic, as
you bring up a really good point about your brown recluse experience, and the way they typically function is, like you said, it's this necrotizing venom that spreads, just like the necromancer's evil spreads throughout Mirkwood. In some ways, he's a spider that's bitten Greenwood the Great and turned it into Mirkwood, so it's only natural that the real encounter with the darkness and murkiness on the part of our, hapless heroes is through spiders, which do just that same thing.
And of course, that harkens back to the ancestors of these spiders, which are Ungoliant and Shelob, who is a relative. Right. Shelob is the descendant from Ungoliant. And Tolkien's mythology is the great spider that grew out of the bad singing of Melkor at the very beginning of creation. So she is a dark, feminine, devouring force that is from the beginning of the created world. Very much like the image of the saltwater dragon Tiamat out of Babylonian creature that wants to devour every single thing around it. And that's not psychologically, that's not off base, because we frequently see the image of mothers more than fathers, really, wanting to envelop their children. We call them helicopter moms now, but they used to be spider-like mothers. Hitchcock was very aware of this. He has his all over the place, spider-like moms who want to devour their children and take everything else around them and consume it. It's a void that will never be filled up no matter what happens around it. Ungoliant goes and she with Melkor, and she poisons the 2 trees of the Valinor at the very beginning of the Silmarillion. And that horrible deed causes this chaos to break out in the world, and eventually the light of the Noldor happens to some degree due to that horrible darkening that occurs. Right. So great history. I mean, great history, great image, and perfectly emblematic of what Bilbo has been experiencing in the rest of the forest, which is this enveloping darkness, this sense of dread, the sense of being trapped and you can't get out. And so now, when he wakes up with the spiders, either he says, oh, well, it's all over. I'm going to roll over and let them consume me and liquefy my guts and suck them out, as he pointed out. Or to hell with it, I'm going to fight back. Right. One of the, and like that great poem by Claude Mackay, right? If we must die, let us not die like hogs, but pin all and fighting back, right? Yeah. Bill does that latter thing, and I think it's an amazing image where he decides, I'm not going to be spider food. This is not how Batman dies. And he pulls out his little sword and he cuts himself free, and then he takes on the spiders themselves. and they're little dragons, right? They're little dragons.
Yeah.
And so he comes little dragons and kills one, and that's when he gets christened, right? I christen you, Sting, and Sting, if it could talk, I christen you. I dub thee, right?
Mm-hmm.
I dub thee Sir Bilbo the Brave.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's awesome. That's that's what allows him to save the dwarves. That's what allows him then to be able to survive when they get taken away by the elves, et cetera, et cetera.
And what happens then at the end of the chapter? How do we arrive to the end? He rescues the dwarves from the spiders. And eventually they slay them, they escape, they get far, and then captured by elves.
Yeah. Captured by elves, right, at the very last. The elves put thongs on him and shut him in one of the inmost caves with strong wooden doors and left him. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, and not very fine, for wood elves were not goblins and were reasonably well behaved, even to their worst enemies when they captured them. The giant spiders were the only living things that they had no mercy upon. There in the king's dungeon poor Thorin lay, and after he had got over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water, he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs to the next chapter and the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. So we end with a sort of Bilbo looking happily on.
That's right, because he's invisible.
He's invisible,
He
right?
the ring on, so he doesn't get caught. He's not counted by the elves when they capture everybody and lead them away, and so he enters invisibly into the realm of the elf lord, the elf kingdom there.
Yeah, and out of the forest, therefore, because they by a water path, they're going to escape from this nightmare of the forest. But yes, it ends with him being a different character than he was before, and now in a realm which is more the realm of Fae, which is dangerous but not hostile.
Right.
So, well, a good place to start.
It is. I want to point out, lest we be lost totally in the darkness between now and then, which the next when we pick up, we continue this cycle. Since we've talked so much about providence, it's worth revealing something from the next chapter, and that is, despite the fact that they left the path out of despair, got captured and entangled in the spider's web, and got free, and all this, despite all of that, where they've broken the rules, they've entered into chaos, they've not responded rightly to the divine breaking in on them, and they've lost one of their member. They're lost alone in the dark wood. Nonetheless, we are told later on, once they escape from the elf, from the dungeons of the Elf King out through the waters, that in the end, they arrived at their destination through the only way that would have possibly worked.
Yes.
So despite all the tangled web of their own mischoices, of their own misdeeds, of their own poor choices, there's a higher providence at work nonetheless to get them precisely where they need to be, where had they been good little boys and girls and stayed on the path, still would have ended in a quagmires and swamps.
That's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is important to address before we do finally close. Tolkien is one of the most providential writers, I think, in the 20th century. He's in the same class as people like Flannery O'Connor and Evelyn Waugh, and even Graham Greene before he went nuts. But he's far more joyful and hopeful than even they. I think he is one of the few writers of the 20th century that writes about happiness, hope, and joy. And this is primarily why, because he doesn't come right out and say, everything's for the good, everything's for the best. It's sort of a Panglossian Voltaire. Rather, what he does is he gives you these images like this, and then dialogue later on in this book and the next, that indicates that there's something else going on besides our immediate attempt to do everything perfectly. Gandalf says to Bilbo that if the ring was meant to come to Bilbo, and therefore it was meant to come to you as well by some meaningful power, right? It's never our job to question whether these things should have come to this. It is only our job to do the best we can with the time that we're given.
Exactly.
That's providence, right? He doesn't use the word, but that's providence. And it's the same thing here. The fact that they could not have actually gotten out of the forest easily if they'd stayed on the path. the fact that the deviation due to starvation and negligence and all those other things was the only route that really would have gotten him out of the forest is a providential image.
Yeah.
Providence doesn't work by keeping us all safe all the time and making sure that we're always getting butter on our toast and all that. It's rather, it works in that what is the line? It writes straight with crooked lines, right? Is that the quotation?
Yeah. Even our own misdeeds can serve
Yes.
to achieve the goal.
Yes, right. I often I find myself getting put out by that bumper sticker that I see all the time, that not all who wander are lost. You see that frequently, because I think people that use that, frequently using it, meaning, I can do whatever the hell I want, I'm not really lost. That's not what he's getting at when he says it. What he's getting at is that we frequently think that the jig is up or the course is gone, we've lost the right way. We frequently think that because we're still in that valley of shadow of death, like Bilbo is. But the reality is that the providential power, whatever we want to call it, is still at work even when we don't see it at work, even when we don't see the right path.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And eventually our escape from that forest may be, in a very mundane way, in used wine barrels.
Used wine barrels. Yeah.
But Fulton Sheen used to use the image of old pots. We are all of us old, broken pots. And that's what God used. I love that. That's a very, very good point.
That's good.
Should we end on that point?
Let's end on that point.
And God on toast.
That's right.
Oh, goodness, Cameron, as always, it's truly a pleasure. This is very therapeutic for me.
Will.
In the midst of my dark forest that I'm going through here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Thank you for
likewise.
I see that during the midst of our conversation, the sun has begun to try to come out of the clouds, and I'm like, yeah, come on, baby.
We can do it.
All right. Well, farewell wherever you fare.
And may your journey. That's right. And may the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.
Indeed. So long, Zach.
Into the valley of June.